Hi, I'm Scott Peterson, and I'm the co-head of effects on How to Train Your Dragon 2, and I work for DreamWorks Animation. To explain, as co-head of effects, I was running or supervising the department of effects artists in Redwood City, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my partner, the head of effects, was supervising effects among the artists in Glendale. Since my team was about 15 artists at its maximum, we handled a subset of the sequences in the film. So some of our sort of most notable effects was the snow that we worked on, and there's a particular scene where the antagonist Drago gets blasted with fire, and this is from a dragon that's from the first film. It's called A Monstrous Nightmare, and he sprays this napalm, and Drago is able to repel that fire, and that's sort of his special sort of evil ability that you'll learn about in the film. And let's see, we worked on a lot of ice. There's a lot of ice in the film. There's various water shots in that film that we did in our team. The effects department in its entirety, in its whole, we had really big water challenges in this film. We probably moved more data around in simulating that water than we've ever done before at the studio. What I liked about being the co-head of effects is I actually got to keep my hands in both the supervision and some of the shot work, which is, as when I've been head of effects before, I haven't had that chance to work in shots. So I really liked that balance of a little bit of both. And there were some great challenges personally in the shot work that I got to work on. There is a really big dragon in this film that's called the Bewilderbeast, and you see him in the trailer. He lives in the water, and he has some pretty massive water effects associated with him just because he's a large dragon. And there are several places in the movie where we're doing very different effects, but all related to that dragon. Anything from sort of him rising out of the ocean to he blasts ice instead of fire. So figuring out the look for that ice and how it moves and how it forms, how it destroys things. And then not only does he sort of build these ice structures, he also destroys them. So he's a very active part of the film. A lot of plot points pivot around this dragon, and it was a really great challenge for our department in sort of realizing some of his greatest strengths. One of the things that I loved about working on this film is the sort of creative freedom that the director gave us in sort of figuring out the details of what an effect could look like. You know, of course, he's approving the look, and the visual effects supervisor is sort of guiding us through that process. But within that, there's a lot of room for us to sort of pitch ideas and figure things out. So that they're very much collaborating with us in that process of deciding, you know, is it the simulation that gives you the look, or is it more intentional? And it really depends on the effect, but I think one place where we decided to be very intentional about the shapes and force of an effect was the watery ice blasts coming out of the Bewilderbeast. This was an effect that when we first started, we actually thought, okay, let's actually simulate a big funnel of water coming out of the dragon's mouth, let it hit the ground, bounce up, and just freeze it in midair. That produced a very soft, organic, sort of tree-like structure that just sort of lacked the power and the aggressiveness that we thought that the director thought, Dean thought this dragon should have. So, you know, I guess the sort of high-level directive is like, let's create spikes out of this ice. Let's make like icicles, but in reverse, that are sort of pointing every which way, and we've got big and small, and you can kind of form this crown of icicles, and then we'll use that not only in the effect of destroying things as this dragon sort of fights, but we'll also use that as a staging element for various pieces in the film, little clues about sort of what this monster can produce. One of the great aspects of this film and the direction of the film is that there's a lot of unique dragons. And in this universe of dragons, each dragon not only looks different, but also has a different fire, a different way to use that fire to either defend themselves, or it could be to just illuminate a dark cave. It could be, in some cases, it's like I said, the napalm effect. It's sort of a sticky gelatin that burns things that it sticks to, or it could be these sort of fire bolts, more like what Toothless shoots out, it's trying to sort of make the right fire for the right dragon. There's actually quite a wide variety of different fires to make for the film, and it's really just about like how does the dragon produce that fire. At the same time, there's one instance in the film where a lot of dragons are shooting fire, and it was creating. The director felt it was sort of creating a great degree of intensity in the film that might have actually been pushing it, skewing it more towards the adults, making it a little scarier film for kids. And so to kind of tweak that, what we did in Fire is just color it different colors. So some fire was purple and some was green, and all of a sudden it became a little bit more magical, a little bit more ethereal, and it wasn't as destructive as like the red burning amber fire. Most of Dragons, all of the effect sequences are previs to some degree, that sort of tells us how powerful or how big to make our effects. But in terms of the actual details, or sort of how to make a splash look like it's 100 feet tall versus 10 feet tall, that's entirely within the realm of effects. So like rough previs is really just about putting placeholders and sort of, we want a splash here, but in terms of effects, we're the people that's selling the scale and the lighting and the sort of explosive nature of those effects. Another great way that we work with the layout department and previs is they'll stage things as close as they can with the elements that they use, in terms of like where does the camera point and how are things framed on screen, and where how is the stereo functioning, as well as they can. And then both animation and then effects will go in and we'll do our work, knowing that to really get the best sort of camera, they're going to have to go back in after we're done and sort of put a little lag on the camera, or maybe it's like as if you were a cameraman and you'll see a surprise effect that you weren't expecting, and then they'll pan over to it, sort of a little delayed action. And that can only come from sort of working on it in two stages, first camera, then effect, then camera again. This happens a lot with animation as well. You're right that the same effects will appear in every film, and water. We've had probably water in every film that DreamWorks has ever made. But the audience's expectation for what water should look like in an animated film or in a live-action effects-driven film, that changes every year, because we're always trying to one-up each other. And in order to do that, you really have to stay on the cusp of what computers are capable of producing, or at the cusp of what software can produce. And not only are we competing with other studios to try to make the best work, but software vendors are also competing with each other to make the tools the best for creating that work. So, and sometimes that's a third-party vendor, and sometimes it's internal. I think the challenge is to figure out, where do we put resources? Do we invest it in learning and sort of training up artists to do it better, or to sort of learn the tools better? Or do we actually try to write our own sort of in-house solver for these effects? And we have a kind of a hybrid approach. I think we have a really talented R&D department that creates a combination of tools that we use in-house, but also even open source software. So we're also sharing with the community. And that we're finding benefit to both. Like, even though we're making the investment in writing the software, by putting it out in the open source community, we're able to see it integrated into other software that we then use as artists, and that sort of offloads some of the maintenance that our R&D department doesn't have. Then they can focus their sort of wizardry on sort of creating more interesting software for us to use. One of the areas that we pushed farther than that's new to this film is ice. We've done snow before, but I think large-scale ice is a new challenge for us. And what's really been fun about that particular effect is not only is a dragon creating that ice from sort of blasting the ground, but we also see like whole environments that are sort of made of this ice. And to be able to figure out sort of the material properties of that ice, it presented a lot of new challenges for us in terms of, like, is the color coming from the surface? Is it coming from underneath? How does the color transition on the edge towards the core? These were all challenges that we've sort of touched on in sort of developing skin shading at the studio, but I think ice was another level of depth for us. I did a little bit of art, a little bit of shot work, and a little bit of supervising. I'm most pleased with the way that the snow turned out, and the way that the two people leading the snow effort sort of helped support that, both in our lighting team and in the effects team that worked on snow. So that just being a part of that process and sort of helping build up that team and giving them as much reference and sort of direction that sort of as a supervisor I can lend was very satisfying. And the shot, I got to work on some water shots of sort of the dragon breathing bubbles under the surface of the water, and these just volcanic eruptions of bubbles out of the ocean. For me, was personally a very challenging and very satisfying experience working on. I love FMX. FMX is such a great sort of small community of really incredible minds. To be able to share ideas, cross-pollinate, between the different studios and the educators and the leaders, spending time, having dinner with these people is, for me a great privilege, and at the same time, meeting students who are, the tomorrow's leaders, and seeing some of the brilliance there and sort of the seeds of what will become something great is also equally thrilling. So it's a great conference for sort of the intimacy factor.